All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Next, our twice monthly nonprofit roundtable, where we unpack trends impacting the future of social good here in Mecklenburg County. My name is Josh Jacobson, and I'm Managing Director of Next Stage, a strategy and strengthening firm for nonprofits and social enterprise companies. I'm going to advance my slides. Today we are talking about the 2020 edition of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Nonprofit Executive Compensation Study. It's a report that we recently published just this week on Monday. If you didn't have a chance to download it, I've linked to it in the chat, so feel free to connect there and download. It's a report focused on exploring compensation trends for chief executives of area nonprofits. This is the first of what we think will be an every 3-year examination that we want to do, really allowing us to compare against benchmarks and try to illuminate how we are doing as a community in executive compensation. This is going to be a kind of unique what's next. I'm going to spend the first half of this episode really unpacking some of the data, and then we're going to bring forward our terrific panel to help illuminate that a little bit. But before I do, I would be completely remiss if we didn't mention that today is hashtag CLT Gives Black. It is Black Philanthropy Month. And when we set out to do this report and set August 28th for this What's Next, we had no idea that it would be on such an important day. We did, if you were a part of our last What's Next, we invited Belated Fullwood and Charles Thomas from the new generation of African-American philanthropists to do a takeover of the program. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, please go to our website and you can stream that on demand. That was a great session. And I encourage you to go today to Share Charlotte's website, where you'll find a list of Black-led organizations and Black supporting projects that are very worthy of your support. That's the hashtag CLT Gives Black today. But it also must be said, and I want to address this on the front end, that our compensation study really did not go far enough to explore the disparities in compensation for Black and Brown chief executives, nor did it call out the dearth of Black and Brown executives in nonprofit roles. I want to thank those who pointed that out, and I want to assure you that we're going to address that. In fact, that's going to be a part of our next study and something that we intend to add as a chapter to this work. So definitely want to recognize today's importance and thank you for coming out for this on a day when you could be doing a lot of different things. Right, I'm excited to tell you a little bit about our panel. You're not going to hear from them until a little bit later, but we've got Jim Bales and Kevin Monahan. Jim is Chief Financial Officer for the Children and Family Services Center, where he's been in the, I guess, awkward seat, I'd say, of working with chief executives and board chairs to navigate executive compensation during the budgeting process. So he's going to bring a really great perspective later on to that unique role that he's been in with many organizations. And Kevin, someone I've met more recently, is founder and director of Intuitive Compensation Group, where he works with both private sector companies and nonprofits in designing compensation strategies to retain key leaders. Great guy. We're going to hear more from him later. And I want to thank you all for tuning in today. If you have any questions for me regarding the study, please do ask those in the chat. I'd love to get just a question going in the chat if those of you who have seen the study and read through it, and maybe if you have any thoughts on it. What was maybe one data point that stuck out to you? If you drop that into the chat, that would certainly be meaningful to us as we try to explore kind of what of the study was interesting or intriguing to you. Also, if you have any questions, either for me or for the panelists, please do drop those in there. We'll see if we can get to those. And of course, as always, if you feel so inclined, jump on Facebook, Instagram, tweet us out, hashtag What's Next CLT. All right, you might be asking, like, what is this thing? Why would Next Stage be driven to create a nonprofit executive compensation study? We were not compensated for the study. There was no sponsorship, no grant, no underlying profit motivation for the study itself. And so I wanted to share with you that this is something we've been wanting to do for a long time, almost from the beginning of Next Stage. I've been involved in, and our firm has been involved in, executive search over these years. And it's pretty clear that the board leadership of many nonprofits in our community have either outdated or unrealistic expectations for what it takes to source and retain top executive talent. In strategic planning, that means generating a really intriguing and game-changing strategy, but then not having the wherewithal to bring in the talent to activate that strategy. In executive search, we see it in kind of a different context. We'll come in looking to help replace a executive who's been in a role for 10 plus years, has been underpaid in that role, has not had quality of life raises. And we have the bum luck of having to tell an executive committee that they are paying 30 or 40% below market value for that role. So it's a tough thing to hear. And we felt we needed to address this head on as an organization, in part because you may not know this, but we are a social enterprise company. Go to our website, learn a little bit about us. We have a mission and a vision and values and guiding principles, just like you as organizations. And so while consulting and working with clients is a part of what we do, some of you know about Cultivate, our incubator for emerging nonprofit organizations run by Kaylin Haldeman on my team. That is one part of ourselves. This is also our thought leadership. This is important that we do. And you're going to see a lot more of this from us moving forward as a firm. In this report, readers will find research culled from 990 data, 155 organizations. We pulled data from multiple years in order to analyze it. We also did interviews with 40 participants in an in-depth survey, and we did interviews with 11 chief executives. Just to help to unpack this a little bit, we chose organizations at the $350,000 and above revenue level. And some have asked why would we choose that number? Well, part of it was that the numbers were really wonky below 350. You get down into $250,000 organizations and they are literally all over the map. And we felt that the data really just was not strong enough to warrant inclusion. So we made the judgment call to cut that off at 350,000. So that informs this data a bit. You should also know we use 990 data. And what do we know about 990 data? It's a little dated. So we pulled a mixture of data from across 3 years from FY17 to FY19. So I dare say the numbers that are in this are already somewhat outdated. That said, I think it's the best and most comprehensive study of executive compensation that our city has ever done. So I'm proud of it. So let's get to some of the detail. What did we find? Well, dispelling the myth that somehow chief executives are in it for the good warm fuzzies. In fact, compensation is important. We found that nearly 93% of those who responded to our survey noted that base compensation is going to be important to their overall job satisfaction. And I want to say to that, duh, right? Duh, of course. We are like any other people in the world. Those who work in social good know it's not as if everyone is just an altruistic, taking scraps in order to do this work. This is real work that's being done. And I was glad to see this bear out as it's certainly been a gripe I've had and something I know Jim can share a little bit later too, of just the board chairs who maybe don't have altogether realistic expectations of what it takes to retain our talent. Here we did unpack a lot of hard data. So what I like about this study is, as much as there's qualitative, there's also some hard data here. The 990 research, we broke it down in a variety of ways, broke it down by sector, which you see here. We also broke it down by number of employees. We broke it down by revenue size and various quantities. So one way you could look at this study, if you have seen it and are interested in kind of seeing where do you fit into it, kind of look at all three and kind of plot your mean and median salaries in these different sections and maybe examine how they relate to each other. Obviously, lots of organizations pull a number of 990s from peer organizations as they're thinking about sort of how they might examine comparison. We have 155 here, so we have both overarching data, but also breaking it down. There was a bit of an aha here: education and environment and animals, mean-based compensation, much lower than the health and human services section, where we have a higher mean-based compensation. This was something very interesting. What does it mean? Well, what does it mean for those sectors? We want to examine that a little bit more through our work moving forward, but definitely a data point to call out. We also looked at benefits, and here you see sort of through the survey some of the most commonly referenced benefits. But to me, the big data point was that only 60% of the 150 or so organizations, roughly 90 of the 150, actually offer other revenue, which captured in the 990 includes benefits, bonuses, anything that's not base compensation. And we took that was initially one of the biggest data points that we needed to go examine. As we talked with some of those chief executives, we came to realize that in some cases it is that these organizations aren't offering benefits, and that's problematic. And I think something we need to be thinking about and addressing as a sector, broader nonprofit system. But we also found that some chief executives take a total comp and actually forego benefits, in part because, as we heard, in some cases, folks have better options for benefits through a spouse than they would through their nonprofit, which in and of itself is a finding. Not only are we offering benefits, but are we offering competitive benefits? What are those benefits? So we see some of them here. Obviously, paid time off was one of the most negotiated data points. When people come into roles, this is often a way in which organizations can be more competitive, offering more flexible, more time off is one way to attract talent. All right, a couple of the kind of big headlines that really lead our panelists and some of the conversation we'll have. The first, does your organization have a formal executive director performance evaluation tied to annual compensation? Our survey data suggests that nearly 30% of organizations don't have that. And then in talking to some of those organizations, those that do have it, either it's very new or it's very flawed. So just having it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a good one. And that will bear out in the data here, suggesting that many are dissatisfied with the process of their evaluation for compensation. As shared by one person with me, and I want to ask Jim about this, there's almost a conflict of interest in that the budgeting process often starts with the CEO, starts with the executive director. And so imagine you're sitting in that spot. Some of you on here probably know exactly what I'm going to describe, where you are having to set next year's budget. And there are so many needs. There's the need of your mission. There's a need in operations for you to staff, to retain your own team. When do you get to address your own compensation? And given that starts with you, how is that a fair process? So it puts that person in an awkward position of having to actually fight for their own compensation in the face of all the needs of their organization. So I'm going to hear from Jim in a little bit about how might we do that differently? Because clearly this isn't working, and folks were pretty strong a voice on that. All right, the other big finding was how little pay for performance is happening in our local nonprofit organizations. And I bring this forward in part because we've been doing this as a search firm for many years now. In fact, you can't go into an organization that hasn't adjusted its expectations of executive compensation for a decade and not run up against just their inability to be at all competitive for what it takes to acquire talent. So a lot of what we have been building with organizations are bonus structures. How do we build key performance indicators tied to compensation that would actually allow an organization to maybe think about putting forward a competitive salary, even when the budget maybe on the surface does not look like it could bear that. We're going to talk more about this. This is a signature finding of this report, and really something that we are committed to as a firm, of helping nonprofit organizations locally become more competitive. And to become more competitive for talent is to consider pay for performance as a structure, as an opportunity. So those are some of the high level findings. There were a whole lot of findings, and hopefully you got a chance to kind of pour through the detail and analysis, because a lot of the conversations with the chief executives who were interviewed were some of the more rich content in this, frankly, riffing on the hard data, but also the survey, sharing their thoughts on what is holding us back, what are these opportunities. But more than one person said, thank you for doing this, because this is holding us back as a sector. And it was, we believe that as well. So this is some of the data. I'm really intrigued to know more of what you think about it, and I'm glad you are here today for that. I know some of the comments in the chat right now are sharing out some personal experiences, so I appreciate you sharing those as well. I'd love to bring forward our panel to talk a little bit about some of these pieces. Jim Bales, some of you know, maybe many of you know, through his work at the Children and Family Services Center. Jim has been somebody who is uniquely positioned to comment on this kind of budgeting process, given how he works and the unique nature of the Children and Family Services Center. Jim, I was wondering, would you mind sharing a little bit about the history of that organization and your role as CFO, the back office integration, and that work on budgeting?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me, Josh?
We sure can. I can't see you, though.
Yeah, it says I'm not allowed for some reason.
Oh, that's strange.
It says you stopped me, but as long as you can hear me, we're good.
That's good.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here from the great state of Iowa this morning, traveling socially distant from my 85-year-old mother. Yeah, I've been with the Children and Family Services Center now for 8 years. I serve as the CFO. We are the organization that owns the building at the corner of Davidson and 5th Street, uptown. We are a nonprofit that provides office space to other nonprofits at a very reduced rate of rent. We also provide back office services, HR, IT, and finance. And I am the CFO of the finance section of the shared services. Currently, we serve 12 nonprofit agencies in Charlotte, and we do everything from payroll to AP to AR, and yes, we do a lot of budgeting. We've just come through a lot of that with most of our agencies having June 30 year ends, and so we're very familiar with budgeting, and the budgeting process, especially as it relates to executive directors, is indeed sometimes cumbersome.
Yeah, Jim, we shared sort of the findings that executive directors are a little perturbed by this process. Can you share a little bit? I mean, that doesn't sound like it's a surprising data point for you.
No, it's not surprising at all. You know, especially with regard to, smaller agencies, there's not a lot of money to go around anyway. And so the executive director is, frankly, nobody in the agency gets paid what they're worth, right? And right. So we try to manage the budget as best we can. And then typically I've got a board chair calling me at the 9th hour saying, oh, did we put anything in for an increase for so-and-so? And I'm like, well, did you tell them? Because I can't put it in the budget worksheet for the meeting tomorrow if you haven't talked to them. And did you guys have a plan for this? So yeah, no, not surprising at all.
Yeah, Jim, and I think, again, you're unique in that you do this work with so many organizations. So as the back office, I imagine that being that bridge between a board chair and an executive director, you're of staff, but also not of staff. And so I wonder, as you think about the kind of this budgeting process, how might we improve it? If you could speak to some of those folks who call you 11th hour with those requests,
right?
What would be ideal?
Sure. So the very first thing I thought of when we talked about this earlier was do it before it's time to do the budget. So get something in writing, get with your board, get a plan for the executive director. You know, the board of directors has one employee to manage. And so I implore the board of directors, manage that one employee and then the executive director can manage everything else without that hanging over their head. So get something in writing up front, a plan, like you said, use the KPIs as indicators, some sort of pay for performance, bonus structure, all those kinds of things. Have it be multi-year. Then you don't even have to revisit it as often. Now, we all know nonprofit budgets don't always work out the way they're supposed to, and you can always revisit those, but at least you have something in writing. And the second thought I had on all of that was make sure that your board of directors understands that it's their job to manage that one employee year after year. You know, the board chair and the executive committees of these boards oftentimes rotates annually, usually annually or twice, you know, every 2 years. And it may be that those board chairs don't understand that they were supposed to have taken that baton from the one before and keep that going. And so very important in my mind that the boards of directors understand managing and helping, supporting the executive director in that way will take a lot of burden off of the executive director themselves. And then the third thought I had was, as the executive director, make sure you have an advocate, a mentor, an advisor, whatever you want to call it, someone on the board that's in your court, someone you can talk to, someone you can have coffee with, someone, usually it's the board chair, maybe the treasurer, someone that you can say, hey, nobody's called me about my review, you know, oh, it's awkward, but you don't have to do that in front of the whole board. It might make life a lot easier in that way.
Yeah, that point about consistency across boards, I know that we don't think of it this way exactly, but it would be like having a different boss every year who may or may not have actually talked to the person before them about this process. So really, really thoughtful. I want to ask you about one other thing, because one of the interviewees shared with me a funny anecdote, which was this person put forward the idea of pay for performance as maybe an option, and a long-running board member, not chair, but board member said, oh no, we're sorry, that's illegal. It's illegal to consider pay for performance in nonprofits. That was the advice this person gave. Jim, can you set the record straight about the legality of pay for performance in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, so as a CPA, I will say up front, I don't give legal advice, but I have never heard that before, and I don't understand where that would be coming from. But you certainly have your KPIs, you certainly have your programmatic goals and all those kinds of things that could be tied to
Right.
your compensation, just like you tie them to your other employees' compensation.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of times it's this, and we're going to talk to Kevin here in a second to talk about the notion of pay for performance, but you know, there are some ethical considerations that you have to take into account, directly tying specific sources of funds, particularly donations, to a percentage-based performance or bonus, are ethical considerations, not necessarily legal considerations. I would certainly argue tying directly you know, if you get this grant, you'll get a bonus, is not a good way to create structure. But we're going to talk in a bit about a process by which we can actually build KPIs, build a collection of KPIs that can include revenue. Of course, it would include revenue. I mean, if there's a bonus to be given, there has to be somewhere those dollars are coming from. But so long as we have a collection of KPIs, none of them too directly aligned with a single source of funding, we can typically get around it. But I thank you, Jim. I forgot you don't have your legal degree here in legal certification here in the state of North Carolina, but I appreciate your willingness to go on record. That
Absolutely.
unknown to you. Well, let's bring Kevin forward. Kevin, I've really enjoyed talking with you and getting to know you. such an interesting, I had no idea that your industry was actually one that existed until about a month ago. So could you talk a little bit just briefly about kind of who you are and what you do for your clients?
Sure. So I started a company because I was a key employee in an organization, and had all these talks. And I was in a for-profit industry, but the lack of ability to get compensation correct can be a big obstacle to growth, to an ability to expand, and it wasn't fun when it holds it back. Right. And so we started a company, and really was found that nonprofits had this problem just like everybody else. And so I was really impressed with some of the data that came in here, and I had two insights that I took away that I think your audience might appreciate on what that data kind of showed us. Mm-hmm. And that was that first is, for these boards, is that the data kind of flip-flops from the profit sector to the nonprofit sector. And I think that this is where a lot of, I'll call it limiting beliefs or things that hold boards back come into play. And so what I mean by that is the data here suggested that when you surveyed them, that money was a pretty big issue. In the for-profit side, when you survey people, social issues tend to more than not rise to the top. But then when it comes to talking about money or putting a compensation package together, in the profit world, it goes straight to money. And that's the dominant leader majority of the time in the conversations. And yet in the nonprofit side, it seems to be that the social issues then rise up and limit from tackling the money. And so I think what winds up happening is that can hold people back. And that's where you get, all of a sudden, you wind up finding out that you're 30% underpaying somebody for where they are. Yep. The second insight, and this will bleed into kind of the second observation or question that you wanted me to answer today, was a quick story that I tell called Ask Me, Survey Me, and Reality. And while this applies to every industry, it was the energy companies where I first heard this one. And what wound up happening with the energy companies was they wanted to reduce people's energies and energy usage. And so they put a survey out there, and everybody came back, and the survey said, what would it take to get you to lower your energy use? And it was save the environment came back as the most popular answer. And so the energy companies went around with the information, and they put together incentive plans to get people to reduce their energy and how much they would impact the environment. And what wound up happening was, after months of promoting it, nothing wound up changing. More interestingly, I think, was the next step they took, which was they called their consumers directly, and they said or asked, what would it take to get you to reduce your energy? And the answer was to save money. They wanted to save money. And so the energy companies put together incentive packages and went out there, and after months and months of incentivizing it, nothing happened. Now, it's interesting that when you ask people or when you survey people, you can't get to the right answer that has a real result. And I think a lot of people who sit on the boards either had an experience in the past from a profit or a nonprofit standpoint where they paid somebody, the bonus cleared the account, and then they put their 2-week notice in and left. And in a nonprofit world, you look like, excuse the saying, a fool if that happens and you pay that out. And so there's some limiting beliefs there. What was very interesting was the reality of what wound up working. And the reality of what wound up working was taking information from the data, from asking people what they felt was important. But what was really interesting was they brought a behavioralist in, and the behavioralist said, just show them how much energy they're using compared to their neighbors. And so now when we get our energy bills, a lot of times, most energy companies put out there, here's how much you're using compared to your neighbors. Right. The results were impactful, but it's amazing that when asked or surveyed, they couldn't get a merit-based, or in this case today of the conversation, when you ask people or survey, it's hard to come up with something that will then put forth in the results. Yeah. So Josh, you asked a second question, which is, what keeps people from holding back on implementing better compensation plans or merit-based performance plans?
Yeah.
And, the question at the end of the day is how do you empower a leader or the boards to use the data that's there, be aware of it, to have real conversations about money? Because getting an incentive plan correct, getting a merit-based plan, getting your compensation plan correct can really have a result that drives an organization forward. But missing it can have the opposite effect. So how do you use the data? How do you use real conversations about money? And how do you get a board to break through some limiting beliefs that they may have to have the confidence to implement these types of things? And so at the end of the day, we all as human beings, we want to do the right thing. We want to feel safe and secure and a part of something bigger than ourselves. We also want to be happy. We want to be happy with our choices, happy with our decisions. And so how do you create an incentive merit package that isn't just about money? How do you create one that gives them the power to go after your intrinsic motivators? Because somewhere along the way, I'll take Wells Fargo here in town, they incentivize people to open more accounts. Right. And then when they open more accounts, things got a little bit out of control and it hurt. So how do you give a board confidence to break through their limiting beliefs and use data like the one in this survey to help them make better decisions with an abundant mindset? And
Kevin, thank you. Thanks for speaking to the two things that we really hoped you would. I mean, I loved your comparison in the energy companies. Until we kind of know what our neighbor's doing, what a neighboring nonprofit, until we do this sort of study, and how many organizations are doing that to really, there was someone who commented about asking what does the person need versus what should we be paying, and really understanding what the market is so good. And to your second point, we have an offering that we're putting forward that we wanted to tell you all about, creating a nonprofit executive pay for performance platform. So that's something that Next Stage is going to be doing. We have a 90-minute workshop in September, from September 18th from noon to 1:30, where we're going to have an opportunity to really walk through a workbook, a toolkit on how to build those KPIs to really create that ethical incentivization plan. And I know Kathy Ridge noted in the comments here that a lot of it's about ethics. It's not about legality. It's what is ethical, and we are students of that. The AFP ethical guidelines around giving, and so we want to take a cohort through this. We are going to have this as a digital workshop. For the registration, you get five participants from a single organization. And so you can find that on our website under workshops and webinars. Please do sign up. So that's an offering. And this is one of many things we intend to be doing through this research, and really how can we be of best service as an organization to this community. I want to bring us back to our homegrown social impact, which is our next session, which is actually not August 28th, it is September 11th. Kaylin Haldeman will be back in the host seat here with a great panel of local philanthropists talking about investing in Charlotte-based nonprofit entrepreneurship. So join us for that. Please do go to our website, What's Next, and you can register for that session. All right, we're just a little over. Hey, I think we did a pretty good job doing this in 32 minutes, so 34 minutes. Oops. Thank you for spending your time with us. Please do let us know what you think of the study, download it, and give us some insights. This is something that we intend to do more of, not only this study, but more studies. If you have ideas for things you'd like us to tackle. Gotten some really great feedback from area philanthropists who really, I think, are open to this sort of data. And so we look forward to continuing to deliver on that. So thanks so much for coming out, everybody, and take good care. We'll see you next time.